as I've mentioned, had the privilege to do this event 3 years before, and I've done plenty of events within the building and construction industry, and I know that there is a genuine commitment to sustainability. I also know that sometimes questions of sustainability are compared to short-term gains, especially now that economy is volatile, which means that we sometimes consider sustainability a thing for the future. Question is, when does that future actually happen? When does the future sort of start? The impact of climate change is thoroughly hard and difficult to grasp. So to help us to connect to that future in a more urgent and perhaps intimate way, our first speaker will combine science, history, and mythology to explore the big issues of our time. Please help me give a warm welcome to author, filmmaker, and environmental evangelist Andri Snaer Magnasson. Stage is yours.
Hello, it's an honor to be here, and I'm going to talk about time and water mythology, and kind of this urgent storytelling issue that we are faced with. So I come from Iceland, and after 1,000 years in Iceland, Iceland was kind of saturated with stories. There was like stories about everything, every mountain, every fjord, everything had a story attached to it, and inspired by that, I was roaming my neighborhood, and I went into the least inspiring place, and I was thinking, could I find anything poetic there? And I went into the supermarket, and I saw that it was divided exactly like the Divine Comedy by Dante. So you start in Paradiso, the fruit division, you go to Inferno, the meat products, and end in the Purgatory, the cleaning products. So one of my first books was kind of trying to take storytelling to the extreme. And then I've been making novels. For some reason, this thing is just going. Yeah. So I've been doing novels, I've been doing children's plays, I've done films, and then eventually I took storytelling into the construction industry or into architecture, collaborating with it seems like this is collaborating with architects, because buildings, they do have stories, and they have philosophy, and there's a narration, there's a story that you can tell when you enter a building and what the building is about. So I have worked with architects in Iceland. I've also worked with Bjarke Ingels Group on bank headquarters. And currently I am working with Arnhildur Pálmadóttir on a fantasy project for the Biennale in Venice, which is called lava forming, imagining that we will eventually turn the flow of lava into... There's some problem with my beamer. It's going ahead of my story. Yeah, okay, sorry. So imagining that eventually, during this century, we Icelanders will be able to use molten lava as a resource, inspired by this volcano that we have in our backyard. But, excuse me, technician. Yeah, okay, sorry. Based on the volcano that we have in our backyard. But then I met a climate scientist in Potsdam. And he asked me, why don't you write about climate change? And I said, I don't have permission. I'm not a scientist. I tell stories. Scientists should tell stories. No, scientists should do the science, but storytellers do the stories. But then he told me, but I've been doing data for 30 years, and people don't understand data, they understand stories. So as a storyteller here and now, it's your duty to tell these stories. Not only do you have permission, but I can give you the data, and you see what stories you can see. So I started to look at the data, and I noticed a strange thing, that it was like the issue was larger than language. That is, if I say a sentence, for example, in the year 2100, we expect the pH level of the world oceans to drop from 8.1 to 7.7, and this is the largest change in the world oceans for 50 million years. So I said this, but every single word that I said is meaningless. That is the pH level, 8.1 to 7.7. Would somebody cry if I said 7.5? 7.4, would you run out of the building? 50 million years. I could just as well say 50 gazillion years. It's too big to understand. So it actually means that a single human being born today, becoming as old as my mother, is witnessing a bigger change in the world oceans than not only all the ancestors of Homo sapiens, 300,000 years old, or the Homo species, 5 million years, but 10 times the whole evolution of humanity is being experienced by a single human being. And that's where language breaks. That's where I can't really say this, and even the year 2100 is also meaningless. Because if I ask a group of my friends, do you agree that 1970 was 30 years ago? They would say, yes, of course. But I say, recalculate, and they're like, oh my God, it's 55 years ago. I say, yes. How can that be? Well, just like you're 55. So, in a really strange way, it's like when a scientist says 2100, we don't feel anything. We don't really understand what he's saying. So in a way, the issue is like a black hole. To tell the story is almost like trying to look at the black hole, because you can't look straight into that black hole. You have to look at the periphery, at the neighboring stars and galaxies. So actually, to understand science, I need mythology. To understand, to be rational, I need poetry. To be global, I have to be personal. And to understand the future, I actually have to understand the past to understand that. So I was going to these oldest things that I had seen, like this manuscript here, which is, that was my grandmother. Yeah, okay. I'm wondering if I should just, sorry about this. So I was looking at this oldest manuscript that I've seen, and this is 800 years old, and I could actually read this. It's because of 3 continents. This is, I could actually read something that was 800 years old. And I was thinking, will somebody be able to read something that I do after 800 years? When is that? Like in the year 2800. And how has the world changed more in the previous 100 years than the previous 700 years before that? So I was so lucky to have almost all my grandparents alive, so I could encounter their life experiences, how it was to be born in Iceland when we were basically almost like a medieval society, how it was to experience the modernization, how it was to be a young woman in the 30s, 40s. I was speaking to my grandparents about their honeymoon, which was a 4-week honeymoon to measure and map Vatnajökull, which is Europe's biggest glacier. And these were pioneering trips, and these places didn't have any names, and my grandparents were stuck in a tent for 3 days, and asked them, weren't you cold? And they said, cold. We were just married. And I was actually 11 when I asked this question, and I was like, how do you get warm when you get married? I had like no idea. So I was kind of trying to connect to the experience of these people, and how actually, during those times, how the glaciers were in the context of eternity. That is, they had always been there, they were discovering them, they were measuring them, mapping them, and laying the foundations of the Icelandic Glacial Research Society. And then I interviewed my other grandfather, Björn. He moved to New York, became a surgeon, chief surgeon of the New York hospital, and one of his patients was Oppenheimer, the father of the nuclear bomb. And I was really starstruck that I actually could speak to somebody that had operated on Oppenheimer. And I asked him, did you see anything special on the operating table? Did you feel anything? And he said, he looked exactly like the image of Christ in the church in my childhood town in Bíldudalur. And I took a picture of him, and he was quite close. But both of these characters are a symbol of time. That is, I'm born 1,973 years after Christ, but I'm born 80 years after I'm born less than 40 years after the Trinity explosion. That was 80 years ago, exactly this summer, which many people believe should be the beginning of a new, not historical era, but basically a new geological era, that is the Anthropocene. So that means that I'm not born in a different historical time than my grandfather. I'm born in a different geological time. And that means that I'm actually born into a time when me as a human against the planet has a completely different meaning than when he was a boy and his collective humanity against the planet. So when a paradigm shifts, then you could say that language collapses. And you actually don't really understand. And how do you understand what it means not to understand that a new era has started? And I can take an example. Like when Icelanders became Christian, we had rules in poetry. So you did not say, in the heathen times, you did not say sky, you said dwarf's helmet. You did not say earth, you said the bride of Odin. And then they become Christian. And how do you talk about the creator of heaven and earth when the language forces you to talk about the creator of the Odin's bride and the dwarf's helmet? They could not speak about the new religion without having the whole legacy of the old religion kind of in their luggage. It took about 100 years to understand Copernicus, that actually the earth was going around the sun, but not vice versa, like our daily experience was telling us. When democracy was introduced to Iceland in the year 1809, there was a strange revolution where this person here, Jörgen Jörgensen, he locked in the local Danish authorities and he created this Declaration of Independence that said in 1809 that the 1st of July we were under the King of Denmark and we should get rid of him and we should become a republic. And the 1st of July he would resign and we would have a constitution and the common and poor people should have an equal share in the government as the rich and powerful. For us, it feels like something we're born to understand. You know, I'm born to understand this. I know that I'm equal and we have rights and that's how the world order is. But how do you understand how they did not understand this? Do you understand? How do you understand that when these words were coined, that this was just total nonsense? This was just like, how irrational is this? What do you mean, like these peasants here should have the same share as this noble person here? It doesn't make any sense. It will never work. So the people that understood what he was saying, they were born 1809. And 100 years later, in 1918, we became independent. And it took like 100 years of poetry, talks, petitions, discussions, arguments, until this was so saturated that we could understand that we wanted to become independent. In 1915, women got the right to vote. And because we know that women are equal to men, how long does it take for the parliament to fill up kind of 50-50, men and women? After the law has been made, 2 elections, 3 elections, 4 elections, pessimistic 5 elections. My grandmother was born 1924. She was one of the first women to fly in Iceland. And in 1944, it wasn't expected that you might want to fly. So if you understand this Icelandic here, fæddur means born as a man in Icelandic, but she was fædd, which is born as a woman. So they had to mark out ur. So this means actually how, when a paradigm shifts, you go against the language, you go against the norm of how we speak. And in 1975, we had this women's strike, which is 60 years after women got the right to vote. There were 3 women in the parliament after 60 years. And then they had this women's strike, and they just said, okay, this can't go further. And 5 years after that, we had Vigdís, the first female president. But it wasn't until 100 years later, more than that, in 2022, that we finally had an equal parliament in Iceland. Max Planck said a new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die and a new generation grows up that is familiar with it. Kind of pessimistic. But I was lying in this area here. I was traveling this area. So this is Höfði, the White House is Höfði, where Reagan and Gorbachev met, and marks the ending of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall and the liberation of these countries. But the house next door was the headquarters of Kaupthing Bank, the third largest bankruptcy in capitalist history. So not being 40, I had witnessed kind of huge ideologies collapse. And I was lying in that bush over there, and I was thinking, what is next? Because both of these ideologies forgot a little small detail, which is we're living in a very fragile biosphere, on a very fragile earth, in a very delicate balance. And because of these two ideologies, they forgot that minor detail. We have new words coming out that are as new to us as the word democracy was in 1809. So words that are here, but we don't really understand it, and we don't really understand how we don't understand it, if you understand. So ocean acidification was created around the year 2004, and it's about one of the greatest geological events on the planet, not in human history, but basically in the whole geological history of the planet, is how the pH level is dropping from 8.1 to 7.7. And when you see a graph like this, it means you are in a paradigm shift. That is, you just got information that tells you that everything before you was wrongly calculated because you don't really want this to happen. Nobody intended to create this change in the oceans. Nobody believed that a human could actually have an influence on such a fundament. So we can understand plastic in the ocean. It's tangible, but we can't really touch ocean acidification. We can't go to the beach and fix that. So it's a very untangible, invisible problem. And I was thinking of this issue about the ocean when I got a phone call and I was invited to interview the Dalai Lama. And it wasn't like directly in the thought process, but I thought, okay, yes, I can talk to him. But what can I ask a person that has reincarnated 14 times? Like, how was your 7th life compared to your 11th life? But I was thinking of cows, and I was thinking of a wise question to ask him, because he's in exile in India, and there were cows roaming all the streets over there in Dharamsala. And I was thinking of Humla in Nordic mythology, the beginning of time, actually. The beginning of the world started with a frozen cow. So I was thinking, frozen cow, that's interesting. It doesn't make any sense. It sounds like a whispering game that went wrong. So Humla, in the beginning of time, was a frozen cow, and from the udders came the 4 rivers that nourish the world. And it sounds like some kind of nonsense. But then in India, they have Kamadhenu, which is the world cow, and the foundations of that cow are the Himalayas. If you look at the legs of the cow, then it's the Himalayas. And in the Himalayan region, you have the Nepal section of the Great Himalayan Trail, ending in Humla at the border with Tibet. And from there come the 4 great rivers of Asia, the Indus, the Ganga, the Brahmaputra, the Sutlej, and the Ganges. And the origin of the Ganga is a glacier called Gomukh, and it means the mouth of the cow. So I was like, of course, it makes total sense. A frozen cow as a source of life is a perfect metaphor for a glacier that is scraping the bedrock, releasing this milky white river that is better than water because it's full of all the nutrients that you need to replenish your field. And if you look at the Himalayan range, about 1 billion people are relying on this meltwater and this cycle of rain and snow and melt that has been going on for like 6,000 years. So I met His Holiness, and he told me that that I should actually speak to Icelandic glacial scientists to understand the glaciers because they were lacking research at the time of how the glaciers in the Himalayas would react to climate change. So basically I went to the farthest point to meet the most distant holy person, and he told me basically go back and talk to your grandmother. because the glaciers in Iceland have been measured and mapped for more than 60, 70, 80 years now. And this data can be used to understand how long the glaciers will last according to current temperature. And it's showing that the major glaciers of Iceland will actually disappear before the year 2160. And when data like this comes out, it's also a paradigm shift, because nobody intended this to happen. And this is nature leaving geological speed, entering human speed. And this is a change that is totally unprecedented. So then the question is time. How do we understand data that says 2160? How do we reclaim that from Hunger Games? This is 140 years after Blade Runner. So how can we create an imagination about 2100 that is intimate and real, but not some kind of dystopia? So I did this experiment. When is someone still alive that you will love? So I went to my grandmother's house, grandmother Hulda, with my daughter Hulda. And we sat in her kitchen, and then we calculated, when do you become as old as grandmother? And my grandmother and Hulda, they do the calculation, and they find the year 2104, when my daughter will be as old as grandmother. And we were like, wow, 2104. And imagine you might swap seats, you might buy this house, you might renovate it, it might look exactly the same, but you'll sit on the other side of the table and somebody comes to visit, somebody that is your favorite person in life, maybe not even as young as you, maybe somebody born 2080, maybe somebody that is 24 years old at that time, and that person is like the person that you really influenced deeply throughout your life, listens to your stories, and and this is like your main person. When is that person still talking about you as her major inspiration in life? If she's born 2080 and my daughter does the calculation, and she's like 2170 if that person becomes 90. So my grandmother whispers a secret to my daughter, something that I will never hear, something from the 1930s. She was born 1924. My daughter promises to keep that secret until 2100, when she's going to whisper it on and ask that person to keep it until 2170. So around 2020, you could decide something would happen 150 years later, only through one whisper. So our time is the time of the people that we know and love, the time that creates us, versus the time of the people we will know and love, the time that we create. And we can basically, many of us can touch almost 250 years with our bare hands, but it seems like there's nothing in our current system that is actually thinking, 2050, 2080, and nobody like 2160. So just in the lifetime of not my grandmother, but in my son's lifetime, because my son was born 1997, in 1999, Ólafur Elíasson, artist, did this glacial series, and my son became his assistant when he was revisiting the sites from 1999 in 2019. So only in the life of my own child, the glaciers of Iceland have changed like this. So I got this strange task to write the text for the monument of the first glacier that Iceland loses to climate change, the Okjökull glacier. And I wrote this text here. A letter to the future. Okjökull is the first Icelandic glacier to lose its status as a glacier. In the next 200 years, all our glaciers are expected to follow the same path. This monument is to acknowledge that we know what is happening and what needs to be done. Only you know if we did it. August 2019, 415 ppm of CO2. I think it's already reached 426 when I checked last time. So everybody can do this calculation. When is someone still alive that you will love? Put that date somewhere. Look at the science of what needs to be done. Look at your jobs and see how you can align our life, our existence, with the most urgent date that seems so far away. But if you speak to somebody that is 100 years old, and you ask him, are 100 years a long time or a short time, that person will tell you 100 years are like this. I feel like I was traveling in the glacier yesterday. I feel like I was flying the day before. So in this strange way, 100 years are like this immeasurable, enormous future, but in hindsight, it's just like this. So thank you very much. When is someone still alive that you will love?
That is such a powerful question that it moves you by heart, truly. I think that was what this applause reflected as well. So you've made it clear, I think, with that we need to reconnect emotionally to what's actually going on instead of perhaps placing the results in numbers or actions and stuff like that. However, I want to make sure that we also get to another point of what you're doing, because this is interesting as well regarding the business that we're talking about today. I know that you are collaborating with an Icelandic architect named Arnhildur Pálmadóttir, using molten lava as a sustainable building material. Will you please just talk about that for a while?
Yeah, that is a child of Arnhildur. She won the Nordic Environmental Prize last year for her sustainable architecture in collaboration with Icelandic in Denmark. And so this idea is that could we find a resource close by that is climate neutral and sustainable? And so she created this kind of fantasy project, because the geothermal that we use, that was sci-fi 100 years ago. So she's wondering, could we use basalt and the heat and the lava as building material? But it's also kind of a statement of we have to start thinking really out of the box. We have to really start taking chances. We have to start researching. We have to look in our closest environment, because sometimes there is value that we can use that we haven't thought about or reached. So it's both a real statement, an idea, but it's also kind of a statement on we have to start widening our ideas.
So how's it going?
It's going. We've actually done some experiments, and we've started making the first bricks. And actually, we have a very good test laboratory now, because we have a volcanic eruption every month now in the backyard of Reykjavik. So we're slowly kind of learning how to deal with it, and so that actually the know-how is gathering there. And so she's imagining, and we're imagining, like after maybe 100 years, they will already have drilled into it, and they're going to build a whole city out of it in Venice. Yeah.
Okay, so that will be somebody who we love, then, that will see how that plans out.
Yes, yeah.
Great. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sending that thoroughly important message of reconnecting emotionally to what's actually going on. We have many ways of thanking you, of course, for this, but this is a reminder that you can all get your own caricature. That's not the easiest walkthrough that I've done from his message to a caricature, but here it is. Thank you so much, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.